Welcome to this presentation. We're going to continue to talk about pronouns. Specifically, we're going to talk about indefinite pronouns. The use of indefinite pronouns has a couple of perils associated with it, and they're actually related problems. So we'll be talking about both the problem of using the indefinite pronoun as an antecedent to a later pronoun, as well as the subject of a subject-verb agreement. So let's get started. Let me first of all show you the material that we'll be looking at in our Aspen Handbook. And we'll be looking at this material in two separate places. The indefinite pronoun section of the 4th edition, which has the red cover, is on page 8. It starts on page 8, and it continues on a little bit into page 9. In the green book, we'll be looking at pages 7 and 8 for our discussion about subject-verb agreement. But we also need to move ahead to about page 17. So I'm going to advance here to about 17, and we'll see. Let's see here, we'll be looking at, here we go. We'll be on page 18. So on page 18 of the 4th edition through page 19. And then in the green book in the 3rd edition, we'll be looking at starting on page 17 and page 18. So if you haven't already, go ahead and pause me, go get the book so we can be flipping through the books together as we talk. You may also want to pull up this document. This is a document that's growing, so it's a little bit longer than an earlier edition, and it should be growing a little bit even after this presentation. But by the time you watch this video, there will be one long document that you'll be able to flip through, and it will contain the content that you see here. And so let's get started talking about indefinite pronouns. The first thing to consider, of course, when we're talking about indefinite pronoun, is what the heck is an indefinite pronoun? Well, of course, the first thing to say is it's a pronoun. It is a word that replaces a noun. Indefinite pronouns are really super common in English and most Western European languages. They're really, really common. These are words that you use all the time, and they don't seem even the littlest bit mysterious or difficult for you to use. You may recall when we were talking earlier, we talked about how pronouns are set up. Well, these pronouns that we were talking about previously, all of these are actually definite pronouns. They are a particular type of pronoun. For most of us who think about pronouns very regularly, and it's probably not that many of us, these are the words that we think of when we think about pronouns. The definite pronouns, when you were in grade school and your 3rd grade teacher was saying, this is a pronoun, he or she said, I, me, my, you, your, he, she, it. Those were the pronouns that you were told were pronouns, and they absolutely are pronouns. But they're not all of the pronouns that exist. So now we're going to talk about another category of pronouns that are equally awesome and are also super special, and we're going to talk about those. But you might be a little bit like, those are pronouns? Well, they are. They are a special category. They are the indefinite pronouns. And since the definite pronouns are I, you, me, he, she, it, they, them, their, all of those words are definite pronouns. Let's look at what the indefinite pronouns are. And here's just a sampling. This is not an exhaustive list. Anybody, anyone, anything, each, every, everyone, everybody, everything, nobody, no one, nothing, one, somebody, someone, something. Those are just a sampling of some of the indefinite pronouns. And you probably already have a sense, even before we go into what the definition is, we already have a sense that these are fundamentally different than these. And we can see that definiteness seems to be the issue. When I use the pronoun I, it's 100% clear who I'm talking about, me, Cynthia Groover. And when I say you, when you and I are having a conversation, it's also 100% clear I'm talking about you, the listener. And if I say he and I have an adequate noun antecedent, it's obvious that I'm talking about Bob or Larry or some other person. The identity is clear. It's definite. But when we talk about anybody, each, everybody, one, someone, something, these words aren't pointing to a unique person or a unique thing. We're talking about not someone specific, not someone or something definite, but to a category of things, to something that is somewhat amorphous. And that is the distinction between an indefinite pronoun and a definite pronoun. By its very nature, an indefinite pronoun isn't going to have an antecedent noun. So remember before we were talking about, in fact I actually said, third person pronouns require an antecedent noun. Well, that is true if we're dealing with definite pronouns. But now we're talking about indefinite pronouns, and they don't typically have antecedents. So when we say anybody, even though it's a pronoun, even though it's in third person, we aren't going to have a noun that comes before it that tells us or that we are renaming by saying anybody. So that's one difference between definite and indefinite pronouns. But you know what? You already knew that on some level. Your brain was already wired for that information. So I'm really not telling you something that you didn't already know. The confusing things for us about indefinite pronouns are that we have a division between the meaning of the word and the grammar of the word. When we have, let's just look at, for a second at the word everybody. When I hear the word everybody, I imagine a room crammed full of people. That's my mental image. There's some old people in the room, there's some young people in the room, there's some African Americans and Caucasians and Asian. I mean, it's just a very diverse group of people. And that's what I think of everybody. It represents every single demographic and every single profession, and it just, it's we are the world, so to speak. That's what I think of when I think of everybody. For me, and I think for most people, it has this plural meaning. But let's look at the word. We know the word body is singular, so we're saying everybody. So the word body is singular. I mean, we know if the word were instead body, and I wanted to say that I'm referring to seven body, I wouldn't say seven body, I would say seven bodies, right? If I'm only referring to one body, I would say one body. And so we know that structurally every body is singular. We're not saying everybody's. And we know that words that end with a Y are typically singular, and you would take away the Y and add an IES if we wanted to make it plural. So while the word everybody suggests a whole group of folks, grammatically it is singular. That's kind of a mind bender there. It's kind of unexpected because usually, at least in English, the grammar and the meaning, at least in terms of plural and singular, usually mesh up pretty well. So I just made that sound like that was a strange and new fact that you've never heard of before. The fact that you're in this class means, though, that you are a fluent speaker of English. And so you already knew this. You may not know that you knew this, but you in fact did know this. Let me just show you some examples. Somebody is going to buy that house soon. Every day is a gift. No one has filed a lawsuit about the dispute. Everything is going well for Bob. In all of these sentences, I am using a singular verb. Our indefinite pronoun is acting as the subject. Let me go ahead and I'll just put that in pink. And so we ought to have a verb that matches the subject. You need to have subject-verb agreement. And we can see that these are singular. We wouldn't say they has, we'd say she has. We wouldn't say they is going to buy the house. We would say he is going to buy the house. We wouldn't say they is doing well for Bob. We would say it is going well for Bob. So the verb that we're using is singular, and we don't even have to think about that. Our ear is tuned. We know when we say no one, we need to use a singular verb. Let's just listen to it the other way, because it is going to sound weird to us. It's going to sound incorrect. If we actually heard someone say this, we might think they were drunk, or maybe English isn't their first language. No one have filed a lawsuit about the dispute. That doesn't sound right to us. Somebody are going to buy that house soon. Again, doesn't sound correct. We know what they mean, but it doesn't sound the way that we expect it to sound. Everything are going well for Bob. Again, doesn't sound right. Every day are a gift. Each day are a gift. So we know just instinctively, intuitively, that this is the right way and this is not correct. So we know that each one of these verbs are singular, at least in how we form our sentences, even though the meaning is plural. So you may say, well, Gruber, why have you spent the last 10 minutes telling me something I already knew? I had a better way to spend my time. You probably did, but hopefully there's a little bit of a payoff that we're getting to. And that is, we almost always get this part. We almost always pick the right verb. So we usually don't have a problem with subject-verb agreement. But these indefinite pronouns can act as antecedent nouns. And I'm actually going to make a little tweak here. So these indefinite pronouns can actually be a antecedent that relates to that. So when we say somebody, or we say everyone, then later on we want to use a definite pronoun. So we use everyone earlier in the sentence, and now we've got to decide which of the definite pronouns are we going to use. Are we going to use he, she, it? One of these? Or are we going to use they? Let's assume that we're going to use this as a subject of the sentence. Well, you may recall from before, our pronoun must match its antecedent in number, person, and gender. So if our indefinite pronoun is singular, then we can't use the they, because that's, of course, a plural one. So we just have to make this one go away. So we have to use he, she, it in order to proceed. Then we have to make sure we're matching in person. Well, we already did that because all of these indefinite pronouns are third person. And so we know we need to be on this row. And then the other thing we have to have is gender. Well, someone or everyone doesn't have a gender. I mean, each person in that category has a gender. There will be some men who are part of that universal everyone. There are some women who are part of that universal everyone. Usually when we say that term, we're referring to human beings, so we wouldn't have any non-gendered items. But that universe will include males and females. But our definite pronoun, third person singular choices are all gender specific. The word he in this context means a male. The word she means a female. The word it means a non-gendered item. And so there is no definite third person, definite singular pronoun that is going to work. We have a problem here because we don't match. It's the same problem we talked about during our first lecture about noun pronoun agreement. So we have the same strategies that we can use to fix this problem. And we may recall, here's this discussion section right here. We may recall that we have 3 strategies, and actually under each one of these categories there's multiple strategies, but let's just think about them as kind of 3 buckets that we can talk about. One is to change the antecedent noun or pronoun. So we could change it from everyone to something else. Or we could change the pronoun that we're using. So instead of saying they, we could say he or she. These first 2 strategies are probably the most intuitive, the most immediate that you think about. But sometimes the easiest, the best strategy is just to completely rewrite the sentence. So let's just play around with one here. And I'm going to actually use the sentences that we have here already. So I'm going to say, everyone wrote her name on the paper. Well, we know immediately this is wrong. Everyone is singular, third person, but includes males and females. Okay? So that's what we have in terms of number, person, and gender. But we don't have a definite pronoun that will work in that situation. So we know that this is, the way I currently have this written, this is not a good choice. This is wrong. Actually, let me go back. Let me switch this one up. Because this was our original sentence. I'm going to say, everyone wrote their name on the paper. So this has the problem. This is going to be incorrect. And we can fix it by choosing a name, a different noun, or not different noun because this isn't a noun, but a different word to replace this. In this case, I picked girl. So let's say that in this universe, when we were saying everyone, we were talking about an all-girls school. So when we said everyone, we really were meaning all the girls, because there's only girls in this group, in this universe. So we could change it to the girl wrote her name on the paper. Okay, so we've changed girl and we changed her. Change there to her. But you know what? An easy approach to this one is going to be just saying the students wrote their name on the paper. So we replace the indefinite everyone with a noun. And probably we're going to end up finding that the noun that best replaces it kind of from a logical standpoint is probably going to be a plural noun. Because again, the underlying concept behind everyone is plural. Well, this has solved our problem because students is third person plural, including males and females. And they is third person plural, including males and females. So we have the problem licked. And we used this strategy. We changed the antecedent noun. But let's try the other. Now we're going to change the pronoun. So we're going to go back to everyone again. We're going to keep everyone. Everyone wrote, and now we're going to say his or her name on the paper. Again, this is kind of the default setting because we know this is singular third person, including males and females. This is kind of the only choice we have if we're going to want to use definite pronouns. Though we don't have to use a pronoun, we could say everyone wrote everyone's name on the paper. Now this is ambiguous because it could mean that the universe of everyone's is 30 students. And one could reinterpret this to mean that all 30 students wrote all 30 names. So it's a little bit confusing. So many times what people will say is the name on the paper. Again, this doesn't perfectly work in this particular case, but these are some general strategies. You can repeat this, or you can, instead of using a pronoun, you can use the word the or a. So now we've kind of covered this second strategy. And then the last is to fundamentally rewrite the sentence. The people wrote the people's name. We'll say each name on the paper. So it's useful to have kind of a checklist of tools, because when you're stuck in this situation, you're like, I don't know how to fix it. If you have these in your back pocket, you'll know some options, some strategies that you can take to fix it. The same strategies that you used before work here. So you're just going to use the same strategies that we used in our other presentation to fix this problem. So this is largely the same problem that we talked about during the first lecture, but it's a little bit more complicated. That's why I covered the first one first and we covered this one second. Because of this, in going back to this example, when we had the child wrote their name on the paper, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know child is singular. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to know there is plural. While you may not immediately be sensitized to it, once you stop and think about it, it's pretty much blaring out, this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work. But these are much more confusing because the words themselves suggest plural. And so it seems much more natural when you say somebody, which is not just one person, but any one person out of this larger group, it seems to make sense to say they. And so it's a little bit harder to spot this particular problem. Okay, let's look at this one. So we've already decided that this is a sentence that we're pretty much all going to get right. Somebody is going to buy that house soon. We're not going to say or write somebody are going to buy that house soon. So this part of the sentence we're going to nail. We're not even going to need to Google this one. But the second part, this is what most of us are going to miss. I will freely admit it. I will miss it if I'm speaking. Is that I will replace somebody with they. And just for the same reasons that we talked about before. Somebody can be a man or a woman. Somebody is singular, but it could be a man or a woman. So I don't want to say he. I don't want to say she. If I say she, what if the somebody ends up being a man? If I say he and the somebody ends up being a woman, that's confusing. But they opens up the possibility for a male or for a female for that somebody to be. That's why we do it. But as we said before, this is wrong because they is plural, so it requires a plural antecedent. Somebody isn't plural. We know because look at the verb we chose. Okay, so we know this isn't going to work. The way to see if an indefinite pronoun is one of these singular pronouns is just try a sentence. Listen to yourself. What word do you want to put there? Do you want to put is? Then it's singular. If you want to put are, it's plural. There's no doubt we want to put is here, and so we know that our word is singular, which means we're not going to be able to use they. That's not going to work. Okay, so let's look at some strategies. And again, this is that singular they problem. When our antecedent is singular, but we're tempted to use they to replace it. So here are some strategies. This is some strategies we can do with this sentence to make it a good sentence. So again, this is incorrect, but these are going to be correct. So we have people. So we've replaced somebody with people. And again, we already spoke about how that's going to be a common strategy to replace our indefinite pronoun with a plural noun. So consider that one of the tools in your arsenal. That's going to make sense pretty often as a strategy to solve this problem. Once you've made it people, then there's no problem using they. And you can see when we switch somebody to people, we're also going to need to switch our verb. We're not going to say people is going to buy that house soon. No, people is plural, so we're going to say people are going to buy that house soon. Since people is plural, since we're using are here, we know that they is going to be the right pronoun to use. So that is one strategy to use to correct this problem. So returning, I had to take a moment break. I apologize for that. So we were talking about how we have somebody that is singular, and so we need to have a pronoun that is singular in order for this to work as a statement. And then we were talking about various strategies that we could use to accomplish it. And one strategy would be to replace our indefinite singular pronoun with a noun, and most likely that noun is going to be plural. If the noun is plural, we're going to have to change the verb. And by the way, this is a proofreading problem that often presents itself. We remember to change the noun to a better noun, but we forget that when the noun is in the subject section, that we're going to have to get subject-verb agreement, and so we need to also check our verbs to make sure that they are in agreement with our subject, noun, or pronoun in this case. And then the they is just fine. So that's strategy number one, going back to our list of strategies. That's this one, changing the antecedent noun or pronoun, often by making it plural. Now we're going to talk about our second strategy, which is to change the pronoun or to replace the pronoun with something else. And that's what we're doing here. We're replacing the they that was incorrect with he or she. Somebody is singular, he or she is singular, so we're good. Now, of course, in this sentence, we have two examples of that pronoun. They both refer to the somebody, or at least they should be. So we'll have to remember to replace both. And then we'd also have to replace the verb because he or she is singular, so we can't use do, we have to use does. So again, going back to making sure our verbs are correct. Then this is our third strategy, where we are fundamentally rewriting the sentence. So we're going to say, a family is going to buy that house soon. Because it could be a single person, I suppose, but I suppose a single person living by himself or herself is a family. And then I choose just to repeat the noun again. And then here, instead of saying family again, I say it. This is a bit of a strategic call. Obviously, the word family is singular, and it's a collective noun, which we'll be talking about in a subsequent lecture. And so we're going to have to use it. But you know what? That sounds very awkward to our ears, or at least to my ears, to refer to a family as it, because a family is made up of people. And it's kind of almost the definition of humanity to talk about a family. And so to say a family is going to buy that house soon, it will get a great deal when it does, sounds confusing. Are you talking about the house? Well, a house doesn't get a great deal. It's difficult for us to equate the pronoun it to be related to our antecedent noun family. So is it grammatically correct to say it? Yes, it is. Is it something I recommend? No, because it makes the sentence confusing, awkward, even ambiguous. So don't do that, even though grammatically it's correct. And then the last one is also a rewrite. And what we did was we are eliminating the need to have even the concept of these words. So I've kept the first part of the sentence the same. Somebody is going to buy that house soon and will get a great deal at that time. Now, I'm not repeating the word somebody, but in some sense I am repeating it, because what I really mean is somebody's going to buy that house soon and that person will get a great deal at that time. And so it's kind of implied repetition of this by having a compound predicate with one section and then another section, but sharing the same subject. Okay, so that is how we can have an indefinite pronoun that is grammatically singular even though it has kind of a plural meaning. That's a pretty difficult thing. But once you know about this problem, especially if it's one that kind of throws you for a loop, I'm going to recommend that you Google for these, not Google, but do a word search for those words so that you can go through, let's say everyone throws you. You routinely treat that as if that were plural. Just do a word search and then go through and check. Am I using they instead of he or she as a noun to replace? Am I using a plural verb instead of a singular verb? Once you know what your areas of grammar vulnerability are, you can put into place fixes that are going to protect yourself from those little glitches that you might have. Okay, so now we're going to move on to another category of indefinite pronouns, and these are the easy ones. And here we go. These indefinite pronouns convey a plural idea, just like our earlier ones did, but lovely that they also are considered grammatically plural. So there's no disconnect between these two terms. They are both, they're consistent. So when we use the word both, I have two shoes. Both are on my feet. None of us would say both is on my feet. Let me just write that. I have two shoes. Both are on my feet. Okay, so both is our indefinite pronoun. It's plural, and we are going to use are, which is the plural verb. They are comfortable. Then you could say that they is for the word shoes, but you could also say they is for both. So this is a correct sentence. You know what? None of us are going to get this one wrong. None of us are going to say, both are on my feet, it is comfortable. Or we're not going to say, both is on my feet. Those aren't problems that native or fluent English speakers are going to make. So these are pretty darn safe. And you can see in many cases indefinite pronouns that are also plural, inherent in their meaning, they have some numerosity associated with it. Both's probably the best example, because when we hear both, we mean two. When we hear a few, we mean, maybe 3 or 4. When we have many, maybe we're thinking, 5 or 6. When we're thinking several, maybe we're thinking 7 or 8. But it implies, when you hear these terms, a number range kind of pops up into your head. And of course, since the number is greater than 1, it makes sense that we would say that this is a plural situation. So this one you don't really have to worry about. But there is a category that's even harder than our first ones in some cases. Our first ones were hard because there was this disconnect between the meaning and the grammar. But these last group here, all, any, none, and some, and these are just examples, are even more confusing because there's not a set answer. I mean, all of these have, well, kind of a plural meaning, although I guess none doesn't really have a plural meaning. But they have it's not certain just when you see these words whether they are going to be grammatically plural or grammatically singular. So sometimes we say all are, and sometimes we say all is. And so you can't rely upon a rule. For these, you'll be an automatic pilot. We always say both are, few are, many are, several are. For these, we always say anybody is, anyone is, anything is, each is. We don't have to think about it at all. We could Google it. Somehow or another we get hit in the head and we forget the rule. We could Google it and we'd be able to find out whether we say are, is. But these we can't Google because it depends upon the context, whether it's all is or it's all are, whether it's any is or any are. So how do we know? Well, let's go through some examples. All of the children are happy. All refers to children. So in this, and obviously children is plural. There's more than one child. So therefore, because the all is referring to a plural noun, all itself is plural. And so we would use the verb here that's plural. And if we were replacing it with a definite pronoun, we would use they. And of course, they is plural, so we'd use they are. So this is correct. But if we say all of the sand got into my car, well, sand isn't plural, right? So we'd say it is a mess. We wouldn't say they are a mess, right? So you have to consider what this word is. Here's another example. Bob drank all of the milk. Well, milk is singular. And so all is referring to the singular word. So we would use all is now gone, or we could replace it with a pronoun, a definite pronoun, but we're going to make it singular. Milk's not a person, it's an inanimate object, so we're going to say it is now gone. So we have two examples of how this works, and we're going to look for what it refers to. Now, here we go. This is an important part of this analysis, whether it's a countable noun or not. Unless you're the little old lady who lives in a shoe, you have a countable number of children. Even if you are a high school teacher and you have 6 or 7 periods, each class has 30, 35 kids in it, you are still going to have a countable number of children. It's going to be a lot. Maybe it's going to be 200, maybe it's going to be 2,000. That obviously not in a high school, but let's just imagine. Still, you can count them. It's going to take you a while, but you can count them. It's theoretically possible. But how do you count milk? What do you count the molecules? Count the cups of milk? Well, now it's not milk that's plural, it's cups that's plural. Or maybe you're going to count gallons of milk. Well, it's gallons that's plural, it's not milk. Milk isn't countable. You could have a big vat of milk, enough milk to give a cup of milk to every elementary age kid in Plano. And still we wouldn't say the milk are good. We'd say the milk is good, the milk is fresh. We would always use is with milk, no matter how much there is or how little there is. And that means it's uncountable. In my other example, when I was talking about sand, it's a similar idea. I mean, in theory, I guess each grain of sand you could count, but there's just so many, and there's so little and insignificant. Similarly, when we're talking about sugar granules or salt granules, we don't say, I put 4 salts on my steak. No. If we were to say something like that, we're probably talking about 4 packets of salt. Maybe, we went to McDonald's and we had those little bitty packets of salt. Salt in and of itself, we don't measure. We might say 4 teaspoons of salt or 4 packets of salt, but when we're talking about salt outside of a measurement system, we're always going to say salt is, sugar is, sand is, milk is. So many times, how you know whether it's plural, or whether you know whether you use a plural verb or a singular verb, if these words are your subject, is to see whether the referent noun is plural or not. And many times when it's not plural, it's going to be uncountable. But that's not all of the examples. Let me show you one from the textbook. Here we have all of the contracts were reviewed. Look at the second sentence. So we have contracts, clearly plural, ends in an S. So the all here refers to contracts, a plural word, so all has a plural meaning. So of course we're going to use were, which is the plural part of the verb. But here we have a single contract, but we're looking at the entire single contract. We're not looking at the first third or the last 2/5. We're looking at the entire thing. So the all is referring to a singular word. Now this is a countable noun, so this isn't a situation like grains of sand or milk. So in this context, because the contract is the referent noun, all is singular, so we're going to use a singular verb. So when it's singular, when one of these words that can be either is singular, it can be singular because it's referring to an uncountable noun, or it's referring to a single item, and of course all is probably the best example of that. From that perspective. So hopefully that helps. At this point, I think that we are done with the indefinite pronoun topic. When we're next together, we will talk about collective nouns. Thanks for your attention. Bye-bye.